Pavlova, Pav, the classic meringue dessert of Australasia. Crispy on the outside, marshmallowy on the inside. I love it in the summertime. My version replaces the traditional whipped cream topping with a pastry cream made from the leftover egg yolks. I really prefer how the pastry cream tastes, though it does present some hazards. Step 1 is get the oven heating to 350 Fahrenheit, 180 C. For a light dessert, I think 1 egg serves 2 people. I'm making a 4-egg pavlova, and I'll separate out all the yolks, just passing them gently between my hands until all the white slimes down through my fingers. Like I said, save those. We'll make our topping with them. Now beat these whites to soft peaks. People say eggs need to be at room temperature. They can't be cold when you whip the whites. I think that's one of those rules that mattered back when people were whipping things by hand. They whip a little slower when they're cold, but I don't care because not for $1 million would I make this dessert without an electric mixer. There we go, soft peaks, just took a couple of minutes. Now, 50 grams of sugar per egg white. I'm using powdered sugar and I am whipping it in a tiny bit at a time. Counterintuitively, this comes together way faster if you add the sugar very slowly. You can dump it in all at once, but then it takes a long time to whip it back to firm peaks. A teeny bit at a time makes the job way faster. Yes, I'm using powdered sugar. Lots of recipes say you can't use powdered sugar because it has a small amount of cornstarch in it to prevent clumping. They tell you to use super fine sugar instead, castor sugar, which is hard to find in the States. I did a side-by-side test with powdered sugar and a fine sugar that I made by running granulated sugar in the blender for 20 minutes. Both pavlovas came out the same, and the one that I made with powdered sugar took way less time to mix. Ideally, you want to mix the meringue until all the sugar is dissolved. You can feel whether it's dissolved by just rubbing some meringue between your fingers. If the sugar isn't dissolved, the baked meringue is going to weep or get little droplets of goo dripping off it. You can make this with granulated sugar, but to get it fully dissolved takes like a half an hour of mixing. The powdered sugar dissolves almost instantly. And when it's all in, you can turn up the speed and beat this until you have stiff peaks, which is still going to take a bit. This took me another 10 minutes of whipping after I got the sugar in. Not stiff enough yet. If it's not stiff, the meringue won't hold its shape when you bake it. It'll just melt, and the inside won't be sufficiently aerated, so it'll be dense and slimy, not soft and pillowy. Those are some stiff peaks right there. Nice. I'm sure it's possible to overbeat this to the point where it would collapse, but that'd take a really long time. This much sugar really stabilizes the foam. Though we can stabilize it further with some cornstarch. I'm going to do half a teaspoon per egg white. This makes the inside taste more like a marshmallow, which I like. Too much will get you a meringue that is strong and keeps forever, but tastes super chalky, aka a cheap store-bought meringue. Another stabilizer is acid, maybe half a teaspoon of lemon or lime juice per egg white. This makes the meringue less likely to collapse in the oven, and it tastes good. We could have put it in at the beginning to prevent over-whipping, but that would have made the whipping take longer, and the sugar made the over-whipping very unlikely anyway. Just mix those in along with a pinch of salt for taste. Some recipes tell you to dissolve that starch into the juice to make a slurry first. I've tried that in a side-by-side test, and it made no appreciable difference in the end. This seems to whip in just fine as it is. Get a baking sheet, line it with parchment. The paper is totally essential here to prevent sticking. Some people trace a circle on it to guide them as they spread the meringue. That is not a thing that I am going to do. You can do all kinds of shapes and dimensions, but the taller it is, the more likely it is to collapse. I think it's good to make a little well in the center for the filling and maybe a little fence around the rim to keep everything in. Really, I just like spiky meringue. Don't worry, there's no way those thin tips are going to burn because we put this in the oven and then immediately reduce the heat to 215 Fahrenheit, 100 C, works good for me. It gets an initial puff and then basically dries more than it cooks, 90 minutes at very low temperature, during which time you could watch a documentary on CuriosityStream, the sponsor of this video. We're going to use a big splash of vanilla here in a second. Let's learn on CuriosityStream how vanilla was first cultivated.
Unlike other plants, it's not immediately clear where the male and female ends are located, leaving most people at a loss for how to carry out the pollination process.
Isn't that always how it is? CuriosityStream is the Netflix for nerds. Endless informational films to watch here on history, science, food, everything. You can browse or just hit now and watch whatever is on. I believe that's called TV. And you can watch on your TV or any common streaming device. Best part, it costs way less than other streaming services do. Go to curiositystream.com/Ragusia for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and nonfiction series. Use my code Ragusia and you'll save 25%. It comes out to only $14.95 for a whole year. Promo code Ragusia, link and code are in the description. Thank you, CuriosityStream. Also, while the Pavlova is baking, you can make this pastry cream, which I would just eat in a bowl by itself. It's pudding. 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar per egg yolk, and then a teaspoon of cornstarch per egg yolk. That's going to be a very thick paste at first, but good. The more viscous it is, the easier it is to whisk out the lumps of cornstarch. If you don't have a tiny whisk, a fork will do it. Got to be totally smooth. Now, we're probably going to want like a quarter of a cup of water-based liquid per egg yolk, 60 mils per yolk. It could be water, it could be white wine, it could be milk, cream. I'm using evaporated milk, which I really love. It really smooths out the texture of things, but I'm only measuring out 3/4 of my expected amount. I can always add, I can't subtract, and I want this thick. Dump that milk into a little saucepan on like medium-low heat, and when it just starts to simmer, whisk it directly into the egg yolk mixture, tempering the eggs. It's a fussy French technique that I've actually A/B tested against just cooking things straight in the pan, and I do think it helps prevent scrambled eggs. Speaking of which, just keep whisking this constantly over real gentle heat, like medium-low. We need to very slowly bring this up to a simmer. If it's not thickening after a few minutes, you could turn the heat up slightly, but be careful, because as soon as that cornstarch approaches the boiling point, whoa, turn that heat off and whisk like crazy. I know that looks exactly like scrambled eggs, but it's not scrambled eggs. Those are clumps of gelatinized starch, not coagulated egg protein, and you will be able to whisk them smooth. See? Time to whisk in a tablespoon of butter per egg yolk, half a stick, in chunks so they melt a little bit faster. The residual heat in the pan should be enough to do it. You don't want to overheat the butter or the emulsion will break. Since I was conservative on my milk, this is too viscous to whisk back into a liquid, but we're on the knife's edge here. Watch what happens with just the addition of a big splash of vanilla. That's enough to make this pudding again, though by the time it chills, it'll be way too thick to spread, so I'll go ahead with the rest of my milk. You can whisk in even more liquid later after it's chilled and get exactly the spreading consistency that you want. The only thing you cannot do is thicken it back up again, which is why I say start very thick. Cover that so that it doesn't develop a skin and chill. Now we just gotta wait for that meringue to be done. When 90 minutes is up, just turn off the heat and let it sit in there and dry for at least 2 hours, ideally overnight. It'll be more structurally sound the next day, and the farty sulfur compounds in the eggs will off-gas or break down or something. You don't taste them as much the next day. I had to shoot this on the same day that I baked it, which is why this meringue was too delicate to peel off the paper. That's fine, just serve it on the paper. I'll cut up my fruit topping right before I want to eat. Kiwi is, of course, the traditional favorite in Australasia. Peel and then slice very thin. I like kiwi for this because it's sour. The meringue is super sweet, so you eat it with tangy fruit and the two complete each other. Now, pavlova is a very tricky dessert only if you demand that your meringue's shell be totally uncracked when you eat it. That's hard, and judging by pictures on the internet, people very rarely achieve uncracked perfection. Even if you do everything right, there's variations with your oven or your eggs or your atmospheric conditions or the specific gravity of your topping. That collapse actually never happened with my test bakes, but hey, if you don't want to risk it, go with the traditional whipped cream. It's lighter, or you could fold pastry cream into whipped cream and get the best of both worlds. These are raspberries, by the way. Again, I think soft, sour fruits work best. I really don't care about the collapse. The meringue is going to start crumbling the instant you actually cut into it anyway. It's possible to get a decent-looking single slice like that, but in general, if you want really attractive single portions, bake individual little pavlovas, little plops of meringue on the baking sheet. And no matter what size you do, top the meringue right before you eat. The topping will immediately start dissolving that cotton candy-like crust. I like how that pastry cream functions like a glue, keeping all the parts together on their trip to your mouth, which is right where they belong, together.